We're on Parshas Vayetzei, and if you want to look inside, it's at 144 and 145. But as always, it's not necessary, but you certainly can. And here we begin our Parshas dealing quite a bit with Yaakov and then his children. And it begins by telling us Vayetzei Yaakov from Bereshis. Yaakov went out from Bereshis. So it's again an interesting way for the parsha to begin, because it tells you where he left. Why don't you tell us where he's going? And then it does. Vayelech Harona. He's going to Haron. But what's the significance of telling us that he left Bereshis? We know he was in Bereshis. We know he's going to Haron. So of course he must have left there. You can't leave. You can't go somewhere without leaving somewhere. So Rashi says. He gives an explanation. Let's see. Well, he says, it says, "V'lo hayatzarich lichtov ela v'yelech Yaakov Harona." Rashi says the Torah only had to say that Yaakov went to Haron. We would know he left Bereshis. What do you have to tell us that for? Lama haskir yitziasa. Why does the Torah tell us that he left Bereshis? Right? We could figure that out ourselves. So there's a reason, he says. Ela magid sheyitzias tzadik min hamakom oser rosham. He says it teaches us that when a righteous person leaves a place, it makes a mark. Right? There's a mark. As long as a righteous person is in the city, hu ziva, hu hadra. Right? He's the beauty, he's the wonder, he's the amazingness. Yetzei misham, and when he leaves there, pana hoda, the beauty leaves, the ziva leaves, the wonder leaves. Right? And therefore, whenever a righteous person leaves a city, it makes a difference. So then you have to ask, what about Avram and Yitzchak? Didn't they leave cities too? And if they left cities, why does the Torah wait all the way until Yaakov to tell us that it makes a mark? Avraham left a city, it must have left a mark. Right? Yitzchak made a mark when he left the city. Why Yaakov? Right? Why does it wait all the way to Yaakov to tell us that if you leave a city, it makes a difference to the city? So the answer is that it's actually because it's counterintuitive. Because Avraham was a very outgoing person. Right? He went out and he changed people. He was friendly and he was in the streets and he was talking to people and he was out doing things. He clearly made an effect on the city. Right? Yitzchak as well. But Yaakov, what did he do? He sat and learned Torah. That's what he did. It says that it was Yoshev Ohalim. It tells us last week. He sat in the tent. That means he sat in a study hall and he studied. He learned in order to become a more educated and proficient at how his life is going to be. So if that's what he did, if he sits in a city, imagine if I move to a city and all I do is sit in my house and study all the time, and then after 10 years I leave the city, is there really an effect on the city? I didn't know anybody. I didn't do anything there. I didn't accomplish anything. I didn't change people. I didn't make friends. I just sat in the house and studied. That's what it seems Yaakov does. So you'd think, I could understand if it told us that Abraham left a city, he left a mark. Yitzchak left a city, he left a mark. But Yaakov left a city, he left a mark. It's sort of hard to believe. What kind of mark did he leave? So that's what is telling us. That's exactly the answer. This is the answer to the real question, which is, why did we wait until Yaakov to say this? And the answer is because it's logical that Avram and Yitzchak made a mark when they left the city. You could imagine Avram being so friendly and outgoing. When he left, the next day he wasn't there. People noticed he wasn't there. Right? You didn't see him. And therefore, right, he made a mark by leaving. But Yaakov, right, he didn't have any involvement with people. He sat in a house and he studied. So the reason the Torah tells you by Yaakov is to tell you that when a tzaddik, a righteous person, is in a city, his very presence adds to the city. And whatever he does, even if he's not out in the street making a difference, whatever he's doing makes a difference in the city because of his relationship to God, because he's so close to God. So even if you have a righteous person that does nothing with the people around him, that has very little involvement with people around him, which we want people to have involvement, right? Like Avram and Yitzchak did to such an extent. But even if they don't, they make a difference. That having them present in the city makes a difference. We see it from the story of Sodom, where God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom, and Abraham says, how about if there's 10 righteous people there? Well, let's think about it. If there were 10 righteous people in Sodom, they had no effect on Sodom. Sodom was still the most horrible place. right? So then, what's the good of having 10 righteous people in the city where everybody's evil? And the 10 righteous people aren't affecting him because everybody else was evil. But nevertheless, there were 10 righteous people in the city. They did make an effect, just not a big enough effect to stop it from happening. So here also, the Torah is telling us that Yaakov made an effect, even though his effect was totally spiritual. He did not involve himself in the physical life, but he was totally spiritual. Still, he made a difference. How much more so Abraham and Yitzchak, which is why they don't tell you about Abraham and Yitzchak, because logically you would know this, but you wouldn't know it by Yaakov. So that's why it tells us that. Then it says, Vayivka b'makom, he came across a place, V'yelan sham, and he went to sleep there. Ki va'es shemesh, as the sun was coming, sun was setting, Vayikach me'avnei ha'makom, he took stones from the stones of this place, V'yasa merosh, and he placed them around his head, V'yashkav b'makom ahu, and he laid down there. So what is this story? This is Yaakov ending up on the Temple Mount. Well, what is today the Temple Mount. And it's the same place that Yitzchak was offered as a sacrifice by Abraham, same place the temple was later built, same place that Adam was created. This is the center of the world, where the temple stood, the Jewish temple stood. Today it doesn't stand there, but we know where it is. So this place is the place that Yaakov, on his way to go and find a wife and marry into a family, he stops, and this is the place he stops. And he has, of course, a very prophetic dream, because he's in the sort of the portal, to use science fiction words, in the portal between this world and God's world, the world to come. But the way we understand it is that he was in the place of this world where the world was created. The world was created from a spot, a little piece, which was Jerusalem. And a part of Jerusalem was the Temple Mount, and that's where he was. So it says that he goes and he lays down and he puts stones around his head. So the commentaries tell us the reason he put stones around his head was to keep away little animals. Because he'd be sleeping, right? He can't control what's going on around him. A little animal will come by, can take his things, could bite his ear. Who knows what they do, right? So he didn't want to wake up with an animal chewing on his face, right? So he put these stones around his head so that the animals would have to crawl over the stones, which they couldn't do, and therefore he wouldn't have to worry about it. Right? So that's what it says. So then it says, Vayichlom, and he had a dream. V'hine sulam mutzav arza, and in the dream there was a ladder with its feet firmly planted in the ground. V'rosha magiel hashemayma, and the top of the ladder reached the heavens. V'hine malchei Elohim olum v'yordim bo, and on this ladder the angels of God were going up and going down. V'hine Hashem nitzav alav, and Hashem is above it. V'yomer ani Hashem Elokei Avram, and God says, I am God, the God of Abraham, Avicha, your father, V'Elokei Yitzchak, and the God of Yitzchak. Ha'aretz asher ata shochev aleha, the land that you're sleeping on, lecha l'ten l'zarecha, I'm giving it to you and to your children, right? The Temple Mount. V'haya zarecha ka'afar, and your children will be like the dust of the earth. V'ufaratzta yama v'kedma v'tzvona v'negba, and they will spread out north, south, east, and west throughout the world. And through you, all of the people of the world will be blessed. Because I am with you. And I will guard you from anything that holds you back. Right? So then he says, right, I'm with you, I'll guard you wherever you go, I'll return you to this land, the land of Israel, and I won't give up on you, and I will do what I have said that I will do, what I have spoken to you about. And then it says that Yaakov wakes up. Yaakov, right, so it's Yaakov Mishinaso, he wakes up from his sleep. V'yomer achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, he says, you know what, God is in this place. V'yenochi lo yadati, and I didn't realize it. V'yara Elohim man nora makom hazeh, and he saw and he said, how amazing is this place? This is the house of God, and this is the entranceway to heaven. V'yashkem Yaakov b'boker, and Yaakov gets up in the morning, v'yikach es ha'even asher sam merosh osav, and he takes the stone which he placed around his head, v'yasim osam atzeva, and he makes it into an altar. So we immediately see that Yaakov goes to sleep. He has this dream. He wakes up from the dream, right? And it says that he says, I didn't realize this is such a holy place where I am, right, the Temple Mount. And it says he took the rock from around his head, and that's all it tells you, right? But you'll notice that it changes from he put rocks around his head to one rock. Right? There were a whole bunch of little rocks he put around his head to keep the animals away. In the morning he woke up, there was one big rock around his head, and the little rocks weren't there anymore. So the commentaries want to know what's that mean. So the Gemara and the Medrash both tell us that Yaakov understood that the role of the forefathers was to bring the world to completion by first bringing the Jews to a high level, and then the Jews can bring the world to a spiritual completion. So Yaakov realized that his father and his grandfather had a problem in doing this. His grandfather, Abraham, had a son called Yishmael, who wasn't part of the deal. Right? So you can't say that all of his children will be part of the deal, because Yishmael wasn't. Then you have Yitzchak, the next one. He also doesn't have all of his children as a part of the deal. Esau runs off. He becomes the father of Rome. He's not a part of the Jewish nation. Right? And then along comes Yaakov, and he's going to have 12 sons and one daughter. And it says there that Yaakov, right, he is the one who is going to have the children, and the children will lead the Jewish nation. In other words, all of his children will lead the Jewish nation. Not like Abraham, who lost one and kept one, and Yitzchak, who lost one and kept one. Nevertheless, Yaakov will have 12 sons and a daughter, and all of them will be carriers of the way of God, and they'll carry it on. So this is symbolized by Yaakov going to sleep, and he's saying to God, if I'm going to be the one that all of the Jewish people are going to come from, because all of my children are going to be kosher, right, and then from them will be more children, he says, so therefore, if that's the case, that I'm going to be this person who's got the ability to lead the Jewish people, because I'm going to be the one, then I want the 12 stones symbolizing my 12 sons to become some type of sign to show me that God wants me to do this. And he wakes up in the morning, and the 12 stones became one stone. So this symbolizes the idea of what we call unity through diversity. That his belief was he wanted to unify all of his sons when he had them, that they should all be there for the purpose of serving God. That's through unity. However, they're very different people. Right? Levi is different than Shimon. Shimon is different than Reuven. Reuven is different than Gad. Gad is different than Asher. Each one of them are different, unique, very strong-willed people, and therefore Yaakov is saying that I want to have unity through diversity. I want all 12 of my brothers to be a part of the future of the Jewish people, but I want them to be different. They're not to be exactly the same as each other. Right? I want people to be different. And because of this, God blessed him that he would be the father of all of the people, of all the Jews, and therefore the stone, which was originally 12, became one, to symbolize this idea. So that's why it says that first he placed stones around his head, but then in the end he just moved a stone away from his head, because theoretically we say that the Torah tells us that there was a miracle, and the stones became one stone to send him this message. Right, so that's what it's telling us here so far. And so then he says that if God will be with me, he will guard me on this way that I'm going. He'll give me bread to eat and clothes to wear. And I'll return in peace to my father's house, and Hashem will be a God to me. Then this stone, which I've set up as a pillar, shall become a house of God. And whatever you will give me, I will repeatedly tithe it to you. So here he's still on the Temple Mount, and he's saying, I'm going to make this altar, but eventually this should become the temple. Right? So he's already prophesying that the temple will be there. Now what Yaakov is doing, right, is that he is going through this process of acquiring all the different parts of the land of Israel that belong to the Jewish people. And he's doing it in this case as well, right, with what he's doing here in order to unite everybody together. And then it says, V'yadar Yaakov neder, and Yaakov takes an oath, Lemor, the following one. Im ya Elohim imadi, if God is with me, Ushamarni b'derech, and he guards me on the way, Asher anochi holech, of which I am going. V'nasan li lechem lechol, and he gives me bread to eat, ubeged levosh, and clothes to wear. V'shavti b'shalom, and I sat with peace, el beis avi, to the house of my father. V'haya Hashem li l'Elohim, and God was my God. Right? Va'evan hazos asher samti matzeva yeh beis Elohim. And this stone which I've made into an altar, it should become like a house of God. V'kol asher titein li aseri asrein lach. And everything that people give me, I will take meiser from. I will take tzedakah from to use for the temple. So here we see King David commanding the people that you have to build a temple. This is later on. And this is where the temple would be, in this spot. This is what they're talking about. Okay, so now Yaakov wakes up the next day and on he goes. He's got to go. He's got to get himself to Lavan. Lavan is the father of his wife, and he wants that he should go there and he should marry his wife. Right? So now he's on his way. So the first thing he does is, if you look at 148, 149, is as he's going through the desert, he comes across an oasis, right? And he sees all of these shepherds standing around and goofing around. They're doing nothing. They're just hanging around. Why? They want to give water to themselves and their sheep, but it's the middle of the day, and they don't uncover the well till the evening. So they're sitting there waiting for the end of the day. Now, of course, even Yaakov, who has nothing to do with them, knows that no one's going to pay you just to stand there. You've got to do whatever you got to do with the sheep, right? But they're just standing there. So yeah, it says that Yaakov walks up, and you see it right here. It says, Yaakov walks up to them and he says, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." So he says to them, "Do you know Lavan, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know." Then he says to them, "Is it well with him?" And they answered, "It is well, and see, his daughter Rachel is coming with the flock." Right, so here we find that Abraham speaks in a very polite manner to these people they've stolen his land. Right, it's the land of Israel. They've stolen it. They took it from him, and they're claiming that they got it. Right, that they have it legitimately. So Yaakov asks them, "Where are you from?" And they say, "Well, we're from here," and we're the sons of the special sons, and this land belongs to us. Right, and so therefore it becomes a bit of an issue because Yaakov owns the land. God gave him the whole land of Israel. So what's he doing? So he says, "Look, the day is still long. It's not yet time to bring the lapstick in. Water the flock and go on grazing." So Yaakov says, "Look, what are you doing in the middle of the day? Yeah, the well never opens till nighttime. So go take your sheep out there and walk them. That's what you're here for. Right, and then come back and I'll take the stone off the fountain." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel had arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherdess. And it was when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother, Jacob came forward and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well and watered the sheep of Lavan, his mother's brother. Then Jacob realized and that he was Rebekah's son. Then she ran and told her father. Okay, so what we have now is Yaakov is going to go meet what he hopes will be his family. He doesn't know yet. And he comes across the well, and you have all of these guys who are supposed to be shepherds, and they're sitting outside the well waiting for the well to open, and they do it by just hanging out. They're just hanging out there, right? A bunch of guys, they work, and so it's sort of like, I heard a story once. It's like, you walk down the street and you see a bunch of guys who are working on the street, right? And they work for you, right? They're government workers, and they're lazy, right? One guy's got a drill and he's drilling the street. The other guy's having a sandwich. The third guy's schmoozing, right? Another guy's taking a nap. Right? They're government workers, so they're not doing such a hard job. So they're supposed to fix this road. So I see what they're doing. So I go over to them and I say, "Hey, what's with you guys? Like, we're paying you, and you're sitting around doing nothing. You're whistling at all the women. You're eating lunch. Like, I'm paying you to, I'm a taxpayer. I'm paying you. Get the work done, right?" So what do you think they'll say to me if I do that? Probably nothing that we should repeat, right? So watch what happens when Yaakov does it. Yaakov walks up. He sees the well. The well is covered, and you have all these shepherds, right, standing around the well. What should they be doing? They should be out with their sheep, like going out and taking them where they can eat grass. That's standing around the well, waiting for the well to open it. You know it won't open. Right? So Jacob says, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." So he says, "Do you know Lavan?" And they said, "Sure we do." And then he says, is he doing okay? And they said, yeah, it's well, and here comes his daughter. Right? So he said, look, the day is still long, but it's not yet time to bring the livestock in, water the flock, and go on grazing. Like, what's with you guys? It's not nighttime. Get out of here. Go out there and take care of your sheep. Right? That's your job. But they said, we will be unable to until the flocks have been gathered, and they will roll the stone off the mouth of the well. We'll then water the flock. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherdess. And it was when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the flock of Laban, his mother's helper, Jacob came forward and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well and watered the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he raised his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. Then she ran and told her father. Okay, so what happens? So how come those guys don't yell at Yaakov like the construction workers would yell at me? Right? It's supposed to be a true depiction of what happened. So can we imagine that if you walk up to construction workers and you tell them, what's with you guys, go back to work, that they're going to in any way listen to what you said? They're definitely not going to. It's got nothing to do with workers. It's got to do with people. People will not do what they're told to do if there's no rationale or no payment or no positive purpose. They're not going to do it. If the cops come by and say, all right, everybody, move along, they don't want to move along. They got places to go, but they don't want to. They want to watch. Right? Whatever it is. So it's the same thing here. The difference is that when I see a guy standing on the street and he's not doing his job, I go over to him and complain. What's with you? Go do your job. I'm paying you $40 an hour to do this job. Go do your job. Right? Quit standing around and doing nothing. But that's how I talk. When Yaakov sees these guys standing around doing nothing, and he knows they should be out doing their job, so what does he do? He speaks to them by asking a question. Instead of telling them, you bunch of bums, go out there and work, he asks them, like, what's going on? Why are you here? What's happening? Is it too hard to do your job? Right? And in the end, it turns out they were just lazy. But he never accuses them of that. He speaks in a very positive way to them. And positive reinforcement is the best way to accomplish things. Right? So by virtue of the fact that Yaakov speaks to them in a positive manner, right? He doesn't say, what are you doing in here with that? Get that belt out of here. Get that suit out of here. Whatever it is. Instead he goes and he's very kind to them and open to them, and he still invites his event, and he invites the same people. So the few people who might come, they'll come. Big deal. I don't think too many people will come unless they're specifically invited, but to an event like that. But that's really where it comes from. So when when Yaakov goes and he tells him, stand up over here, what he's doing is he's going to get rid of the guy, but he can't do it because he's not a court. He's just a person. Right? So that's where it comes from. Okay. And then, of course, it says that he meets Rachel. Now, Rachel, according to the Gemara, to the Kabbalah, to many things, Rachel was his Bashert. Bashert means your chosen one. And when we're originally created, we have a soul that is both male and female. And Hashem splits the soul and puts half in a male and half in a female, and then tells us to find each other. Right? So if we find each other, we find our Bashert, the one that was chosen for us. We can have a very wonderful married life and never find your Bashert. Right? Every one of us wants to think that we did, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the idea is that everybody has one. They have somebody who has the other half of their soul, right? And then that person ends up being, when they unite, it completes the soul, becomes a whole soul again, instead of two half souls from two different places, so to speak. So he says that's the idea of what it means for a person to have like the perfect marriage. It means that you found the person who is the most compatible to you in the world, and that's what you've done here. So here he's expressing similar ideas. It says that Yaakov is going now. He's going to go see Rachel, who's supposed to be the love of his life, his Bashert, right? And of course he goes to work for her, as we know, and she gets switched by Lavan. Lavan, right, who was in charge of her and her sister Leah, It switches them, right? And you can see it in the words that he actually does. But before that happens, it says that Lavan heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son. He ran towards him, embraced him, kissed him, and took him into his house. So Lavan, whose name is not a coincidence, the word Lavan means white in Hebrew. And it says that Lavan was one of these guys who would come up and smile at you with the white of his teeth and stick a knife in your back at the same time. He was a treacherous person. He was a liar. He was dishonest. And you see that later on, in a few parshas, you're going to see that Yaakov is going to complain to him, going to complain to Lavan, because he was so dishonest. Yaakov would say, okay, I'll come and work for 7 years for you to get your daughter. All right, what's my job? What are my hours? What am I supposed to do? So the guy couldn't tell him. He ends up having to be his assistant and doing nothing or doing everything. So on the one hand, he has to pick up his dry cleaning, right? On the other hand, he has the access to the most important person, but he himself is not the most important person, right? And that's what goes on here. Now he goes to marry Rachel, right? But it says that before he wants to marry Rachel, now we hear about here in 151 that Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. Leah's eyes were tender, while Rachel was beautiful of form and beautiful appearance. So what does that tell us? So Rashi explains that Leah's eyes were tender means that she used to cry all the time. She was depressed. And why? It says because she was told that she had to marry Esau. That Rachel would marry Yaakov and Leah would marry Esau, and that Leah would be a strong enough person to change Esau, to make him into a good person. But she doubted herself, and she didn't want to marry him. Right? That's why she's upset. Right? Her eyes are, it says here, her eyes are tender. In the Hebrew, it says that her eyes come from crying all the time. So that's why she didn't. In the end, of course, she didn't have to marry Esau. She ended up being Yaakov's second wife, actually his first wife. So Laban says, it's better that I give her to you than I give her to another man. Remain with me. So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him a few days because of his love for her. And then Yaakov says to Laban, deliver my wife, for my term is fulfilled, and I shall consort with her. So Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. And it was in the evening they took Leah's daughter and brought her to her, and he consorted with her. Then Laban gave her Zilpah, his maidservant, the maidservant of Leah, his daughter, and it was in the morning, that behold, it was Leah. Right, so what happens here? Yaakov goes to marry Rachel. She has an older sister. Right? According to the traditions in those days, the older sister gets married before the younger sister. But Rachel is the younger sister, and Yaakov wants to marry her, and the father agrees and lets him do it. His dowry is he has to work 7 years for no pay in order to take her. So he does. Right? Next thing you know, he goes to the wedding, and Laban switches women. He gave him Leah. Now you can imagine, let's look at this from Leah's point of view. Everybody always looks at it from Yaakov's point of view, that he got tricked. But Leah's point of view is that she has to come to the realization that her father thinks that she's going to have so much trouble getting married that he has to trick a guy into marrying her. Because if I just ask her to, send her out to get married, she's never going to get married. Maybe she's, who knows what. So he says, I can't do that. I have to take care of her. And here we see that, what does he do? He switches Rachel for Leah, but not because of Rachel's dignity, but because that way he can get Yaakov to work for another 7 years for free. Because now he'll work for Rachel. Before he worked for Rachel, now he has to work for Rachel. So by virtue of the fact that he did that, he was it shows who he truly was. So here we have we now have Yaakov at the wedding, and it says that at the end of the wedding, behold, he married the wrong woman. He married Leah, thinking it was Rachel. How is it possible? So it says that back then the women covered themselves, all right? So you couldn't really tell. The 2 sisters were similar in how they looked, and nevertheless, when Yaakov went to marry Leah, right? So she was the one who was proposed to him. So he went to go see her, right? The fact that he comes to see Rachel because he wants, right, and he decides to marry Rachel, the older sister, rather than Leah. So then he has the younger sister rather than the older sister. His problem is that the older sister gets married first. So now he thinks everything's settled, and he goes and he has a wedding, and Laban actually switched sisters on him. He actually married the wrong sister. Now, we have a tradition in Judaism that when you go to a wedding, right, you have a thing called a bedecking. A bedecking means to cover someone in Yiddish. Right, he's all decked out, using an English expression, right? Same idea. So a person who's he has a bedecking, what happens is the man at the wedding itself, before the ceremony, is led by all of the other men into the room where the women are. He goes up to the woman who's going to be his wife, and he puts her veil over her face. And the reason is because until then her face is exposed, and he goes to see that this is the woman in the wedding gown is the one I'm supposed to marry. So he puts the veil over her face, right, because he's already verified who it is, and then they go get married. So that comes from this story. The fact that they do this comes from the story because Lavan switched sisters. Now, the sisters knew that Lavan was a crook. They knew that they were living with a man who was a crook. He was Lavan, right? That's what he's known for. So they devised a system so he couldn't get away with this. So it says that Rachel and Leah worked out a code word. Rachel worked out a code word with Jacob, and this way Jacob would come up to her at the chuppah and say whatever the code was, and she'd answer with the right word, and he knew it was her. Right? It was a code. They set it up so that he wouldn't get the wrong wife, but he did get the wrong wife. Why? Because Rachel felt so badly for her sister, Leah, who was older than her, who was being passed over by Yaakov, who had been offered by her father, and Yaakov still didn't take her. And then he offers her now, right, to have her after this whole process, right? The idea is that Rachel didn't want Leah to be embarrassed. Because what will happen? Yaakov will come under the chuppah, he'll see it's Leah. He'll say, I'm not getting married to her. I'm supposed to marry Rachel, not Leah. You gave me the wrong person. Right? It'll embarrass Leah. Right? Because Leah's standing right there. She knows she's not Rachel. So she'll be terribly embarrassed. So Rachel said, I'm going to tell Leah the password. I'm going to tell Leah the secret words that Yaakov told me to verify it's me, so that she should not be embarrassed. We're told that much later in life, and when we get to it, you'll see it. It says that Rachel was rewarded for this because of her bigness, her largeness, that she was prepared to give up her husband to marry someone else so as not to embarrass her sister. That's how important it was to her. She wasn't prepared to marry Yaakov. She'd let her sister marry Yaakov on the condition that her sister wasn't embarrassed, because she would be embarrassed for not being able to be with him, right? So therefore she went into that. So she did that. That's how you can have the bedecking where you check, and nevertheless, when he still marries her, he marries the wrong one, because the women conspired, and they conspired for a good reason. Right. So now what happens is he's married, right? And he's married to the wrong woman. So he wants to marry the other woman. So he has to work another 7 years. Right? It says to marry her. Her father says, why, I shouldn't have a dowry for her? You have to work another 7 years. So he does. At the end of those 7 years, he figures out how badly he's been cheated. Not only did he have to work 14 years to marry the one woman he wanted, he had to take another wife, which he didn't want, and on top of it all, his life is becoming topsy-turvy, because he's not able to do a lot of the things that he wants to accomplish and wants to do, and here we find that that they're just making his life very, very confusing. So he goes and he marries them, and because Leah is considered the hated wife, so to speak, right? Because even though he keeps her, he doesn't get rid of her, which he could do, but he keeps her because of her dignity. He doesn't want to hurt her dignity. So God also doesn't want to. So since she is the wife who is least loved, God blesses her with children before he blesses Rachel with children, so that she'll have children, right, as a positive statement from God, and Rachel won't until the problem is solved. So it says then that Hashem saw that Leah was unloved, so he opened her womb, and Rachel remained barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuven, as she had declared, because Hashem had discerned my humiliation, for now my husband will love me. Right? She says, Ruvain is to see the difference. Ru-ben. Ru is to see, ben is between. The different, and she says, why is he called Ruvain? Because it says, you see the difference between my son and the son of my father-in-law. Who's the son of my father-in-law? Esau. Esau was a bad guy. He was supposed to marry Leah, right? So Leah says, look at the difference between my husband, right, and my son and my father-in-law's son, Esau. He's a terrible guy, right? So but that's not what the Torah says. That's what the commentaries say, right? But here it says that because Hashem saw my humiliation, for now my husband will love me. Right? Why? Because I have a child. My husband will love me. Before this, she was afraid her husband didn't love her because she wasn't the woman he was supposed to marry. But now he will because I have a child. So this is a very early reference to the fact that people think that if they're having trouble in their marriage, they should have children and it'll help. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. And it didn't work here either. The Medrash says that let's say Leah would be home and Yaakov goes out to work, and while she's home, a dish breaks. She's cleaning dishes and a dish breaks. Yaakov comes home and he gets all angry. What's with you? Breaking all the dishes. How can you break a dish? It's so hard to wash a dish. Right? So she says, the Medrash says, so she could say, oh, it wasn't me. It was our baby did it. Right? Our baby did it. So she can blame the baby in order so she should have a good relationship with her husband. That's why God gave her the child. That's what the Medrash says. So it sounds like a horrible reason. That you're doing it to blame your child rather than blame your husband, blaming you, right? And anyways, why would your husband do that if he loves you, right? So the commentaries explain about this, that she was, that she had this feeling that her son would help mitigate issues within the home. It really means in a spiritual sense. The commentary is right in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense, the presence of the child, by being in the house, another soul in the house, will help in the relationship between the parents, in order that they should have less of disagreements, because now they're going to be united by a common being, common person. So that was the idea behind it. But originally, that's what she said. That, thank God, I have a child. Now my husband will love me. What it means is, if my husband gets upset with me, I'll say it's the child. He'll love me. He'll be mad at the child. That's not what she really meant. She was speaking in a metaphor. Here. So then it says, Rachel realized she didn't have any children, so she became envious of her sister, and she tells Jacob, give me children or I'm dead. Then it says Jacob gets angry at her. Why should he get angry at her? I mean, some women, right, don't feel like they're complete unless they have a child. Right? They really feel lacking unless they have a child. And so she's saying, like, give me a child already. Otherwise I'm dead. I have no life without a child. I want to give. I want to have a child. Right? So it says that Yaakov gets angry at her. And he says, what, do you think I'm God? That I can give you a child or not give you a child? It's not up to me. It's up to God. So she says, all right, then take my maid. Have relations with my maid. And then she has a child. I'll be built up because of her. Right? In other words, she believes that her husband can have children, but she can't. So therefore, she says, go to my maid, my assistant, have a child with her, and I'll raise it like my own child. Right? That's what she seems to be saying. Similar story is with Sarah and Abraham, where Sarah can't have children at this point, so she tells Abraham, go with my maidservant Hagar and have a child. And they do, and it's Yishmael. Right? So here also, we see the same concept. Okay, then we have a number of things go on while Yaakov's there, whereas he makes an agreement with Lavan. He tells Lavan that he's going to work for him for 7 years, but there are certain things he's going to get paid for, and he's going to get money for. And how does he get paid for it? Because if you have a sheep with certain markings, he says to him, if your sheep give birth to a sheep that has specific markings that I'm going to describe to you, stripes, dots, whatever it is, then that baby is mine. That's what he tells Lavan. In other words, I want Any child like that. So Laban will say, well, it's like 1 in a million. How often is that going to happen? It's not going to happen very often. So he says, sure, I'll do it. So God says that any sheep that were born with spots, right? When they're born with spots, Yaakov got those. If they were one color, right, then they stayed with Laban. So how many do you have with spots? 1 or 2 out of 100. I guess not that common, right? It's a genetic anomaly, right? If you have a white sheep and a black sheep, you're not going to have a great chance that you're going to have a spotted sheep, right? It's not like he's spotted black and white because his father was white, his mother was black. He would be like a mulatto color, or he would be one color like one of them. But here you see that he has these spots. So it's rare. So that way Laban accepted it. Laban said, okay, that's great. I'm going to give you all my sheep, and you're going to have them. If they get pregnant and give birth and they have stripes, then I'll let you keep them, right? Thinking that there wouldn't be any. Right? So God goes and blesses Jacob and makes all of the offspring that way. In the next generation, all the children are that way, all of the lambs. So he goes and he acquires them all. Now he's becoming rich. But every time he turns around, he says that Laban changes the rules. That, if you work 8 hours a day, any money you get in is yours. If you do this, then this will happen. Then he keeps changing his mind. Finally, at the end, Yaakov tells them, we're leaving. I'm taking my wives, my 2 wives, your 2 daughters, all of my grandchildren, and all of my belongings. I'm leaving. I can't stay here with you. You're making my life miserable. I can't trust a word you say to me. So we're leaving. So it says in the Torah, I just going to explain it outside because we're getting late. It says that when at the end here, Yaakov, right, is leaving. So it says that Rachel took from her family all their idols. They had idols that they used to pray to. Not Yaakov's family, they were monotheists. Her family were idol worshippers still. So she took all the idols so that her brother and her father and everybody should not be able to pray to idols anymore. They should pray to one God. So it says that Laban goes out with his men and he finds them in the desert, and he says, what's with you guys? You sneak out. You don't tell me you're leaving. You take all of my belongings with you, and it's not right. I was nice to you, right? And now Laban's a liar the whole time. He wasn't nice to him. He did everything he could to hurt him, but he says I was nice to you. So Yaakov says, what do you mean? Every time we made a deal that the spotted sheep I would get, so God made spotted sheep, you change the rules. I only get the striped ones. So God made striped ones, then you say, no, you change the rules. I only get plain ones. So God made plain ones, you change the rules again. You're always changing the rules. And he says, so Laban says, well, I want you to come back. And I'm not coming back. You've made my life miserable. He says, well, you took my kids. These are my children and my grandchildren, and you took them. You can't do that. And Yaakov says, this is my wife. Of course I can take it. I mean, we're a family. We're going to go wherever we want to go. So Laban, at this point, is trying to get Yaakov to stay. Rachel takes all of his idols, all of her of Laban's idols, and she keeps them. And she says, right, that she's not going to give them back, and that she actually says she doesn't have them, right? But she stole them, so he shouldn't pray to idols. So it says that when he comes, he says, all right, somebody stole my idols. I want to search everybody's bag. So Yaakov says, nobody stole your idols. He doesn't know that Rachel did it. He says, nobody would do that. None of my people would steal from you. You don't have to worry about it. So Abraham curses them. Whoever does is going to die. And then we know Rachel dies. Right? She doesn't know. Avram didn't know that he was cursing his own wife, because he didn't know that she was stealing, or that the stealing she did was legitimate. So he went and he didn't allow that to continue. But we see that Yaakov was such that when he dealt with them, he says, whoever took these idols will be cursed. And then he didn't know that Rachel had them. And when her brother comes to her and says, who took my idols? She says, I can't get up. I have the way of women on me, because she's menstruating, she's saying, and it's too painful for me to get up off the camel. Why was it really? Because she had all of the idols underneath her seat. She didn't want him to find them. Right? So Yaakov says, you don't worry about it. Nobody in my family would steal your idols. We don't even believe in idols. We wouldn't steal them. Whoever took your idols should die. So Yaakov says, and then Rachel dies. Not right then, a little later, but she doesn't get back to Israel. Rachel dies, and she's buried in what we call the tomb of Rachel, in a separate area, not in the same place as the forefathers. And she died outside of Israel, right, at this juncture, because of this story. Now Rachel was to Yaakov was his Bashert. She was the one who was originally chosen by God to be his wife, and she was, according to the Gemara, she was an example of the perfect female. In other words, not only her personality and her body, but she was perfect. All right. In other words, she was such an amazing person that she was a role model for every other woman. She could be a role model for men too, but she dealt with women. So she was an amazing role model. And then she dies, right, so untimely. And because of it, Yaakov is never himself again. He never really gets past it. He always feels that loss, even though he has Leah, right, as a wife, and he has all his children. Nevertheless, he just can't get past it. And it bothers him, because Rachel was his like the love of his life. Even though he learned to love Leah, right, it was more so because he didn't want to hurt her than it was that he actually really had this amazing love for her. But what's he supposed to do? He's going to hurt her feelings and tell her, I'm going to divorce you because I don't like you? Like, even though he didn't choose to marry her in the first place. So he keeps her, right? But Rachel dies. She doesn't die yet, but she will shortly. So now Lavan came, right? And finally, in the end, they make it a treaty. They basically say, you go your way, I'll go my way. I'm not going to deal with you. You don't deal with me. We're going to have peace. And this teaches us an important thing of peace. Peace does not mean that you don't get along with, that you will get along with people. Sometimes there are people you can't have peace with. You just can't. It's like there's certain people you could marry. There's certain people you could be friends with, and there's certain people you can't spend time with. Even though there's a mitzvah to love Jews, there are some Jews who you just, whatever reason it is, you can't spend time with them. That bothers you. There's something about them that bothers you, so you can't do it. So how can you love every Jew, right, if you're like that and you don't really believe that every that every person has something to offer you, right, and that you don't like some of them, right? So here we get the example of you can love Jews, but sometimes it's good to have a fence in your backyard. That's to say that you have, they say good fences make good neighbors. In other words, you have neighbors, and they're nice people. Now they come to visit you once in a while, right? But you don't need the neighbor coming over every day. You don't need the neighbor coming over every 5 minutes. You don't need the neighbor looking in your windows. Right? It's one thing to be civil and friendly to a neighbor, but it's a whole other story to have a neighbor who's trying to take over your life. Right? That idea, right, of having such a neighbor, but having a separation between you, is a part of Jewish law. That there are times where you're supposed to love all Jews, but sometimes you can only love a certain person if you keep your distance from them. The more you interact with them, the least you like them. The more distant you are, the better it is. Right? And this treaty that was made by Lavan and Yaakov was a treaty that you do your thing, I'll do my thing. We won't bother each other. In other words, they couldn't be together. And Yaakov takes all of his people and all of his things, and he leaves. And that concludes the parsha. He leaves. And where is he going? He's going to go meet Esau, which in and of itself is an extraordinary story, because Esau, the last thing we know from Esau is that he wants to kill Yaakov. Yaakov stole his blessings. Yaakov stole his firstborn ship. Yaakov did a lot of things that Esau didn't like. And Yaakov was threatened by Esau that he would kill him. And here we see now Yaakov realizes that after all this time, right, I'm married, I have children, I have belongings, I got to go back to Israel. In order to get there, I got to cut through the land of Amalek. And this king, right, is going to try to harm me. And that's what the statue was. Right? It was there as a symbol of them trying to harm us. That's really what he says there. So at the end, the last thing we have is that Yaakov and Lavan make a truce, they make a covenant, make an agreement, right? A peace agreement, right? We can live with each other. We're not going to fight each other. We're not going to hurt each other. As long as Lavan, you realize that the best for your daughters is to have a spiritual life, I will realize that your daughters have a father, and we will do things to make everybody happy. Right? That compromise that he made is an important message for us, because we have to know also that it's necessary to compromise when you're dealing with personalities of people, to be there for them, to help them, to be able to talk to them. You have to know who you're talking to, so you get a good feel for the person. That's the idea. When a person has this good feel for another person, they feel like everything is going well with that person, and I have a good relationship. That's terrific. When you don't, that's when you distance yourself, right? And that's what Lavan is dealing with here. And they end up offering sacrifices to seal the deal, that they can get along just from a distance. And then it says that Lavan woke early in the morning. He kissed his sons and his daughters, right? And then he went and he returned to his place, right? So what does that mean? Is that he went, right? Lavan's still standing in the desert. He catches his family running away, right? And he threatens that he's going to hurt them. In the end, Yaakov shows him why we didn't run away. We have every right to leave. So he kisses his daughters, it says, right? And then he tells them like the future, like things they should know, and he leaves. And that's all we hear about him, right? Now he is written in the Haggadah, and it talks about Arami Oved Avi, an Aramean, right, caused our forefathers to do hard work. And then it goes on to explain all the different aspects of it, of all of the hard work that the Jews had to do when we were slaves in Egypt, by virtue of the fact that we had somebody on top of us, right, who was like a master, who would hurt us as we were slaves. That was that idea that the Jews were left there as that they became like slaves. We find that is a similar instance to with Yaakov and Lavan, in that Yaakov, right, is a free man, Lavan is a free person, and they're both able to choose to do what they see as best, right, and they can follow each one in their own way. Lavan decides in the end he's going to give in, and he kisses his family and he leaves, and that's the end of him. As I said, he's found in the Haggadah, and it says there that Lavan it says Arami Oved Abi, the Aramean person, the Aramite, that's Lavan, destroyed our forefathers, and then because of that they went down to Egypt. So we know I just showed you he doesn't destroy our forefathers. What does that mean? It means that he wanted to destroy our forefathers, because what did Lavan do? Lavan traded sisters, right? Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel. Instead he marries Leah, correct? Leah gives birth to the first child. The first child is Reuven. Now if Lavan had not switched the daughters, and Yaakov had actually married Rachel first, under normal circumstances Rachel would have had a child first, correct? That child would have been Yosef, which means Yosef would have been the firstborn. He would have been the leader, right? Because Lavan switched the sisters, Reuven was the firstborn. Yaakov was one of the last. Yosef was one of the lastborn. He's clearly not the leader, but he's clearly destined to be the leader. You see how he acts? He acts like a leader. He tells people what to do. He's got plans. He's got ideas. He's got great blessings. He is a leader. But he wasn't. But because Lavan switched the sisters, he didn't get to be the leader. That's what it means when it says that the Aramean destroyed our forefathers. Because he went and switched the sisters. Because Yaakov, in the end, Yosef, right, should have been the firstborn. Because he wasn't the firstborn, he acted like it. The brothers didn't like him, because he thinks he's going to take our job away from us, and they sell him down to Egypt, which eventually sends us to Egypt. And therefore, because Lavan went and switched wives, we ended up spending 240 years as slaves in Egypt, just for switching the wives. Though it shows you a number of things. One is a person can never forget the ramifications of their actions. I can do, like I used to have a teacher, and one time, he used to teach like 50 kids in the yeshiva. One day it was a snow day, and people didn't come. Only the people who lived in the dorm could come. People who lived at home couldn't get there. So there's like two or three guys in the class. There's usually 50. So he starts his class. So we say to him, hey, there's only 3 guys here. You're going to have to give the class anyways tomorrow. Like, you don't have to give such a fancy class, and with all of your notes and all of your voices and all of your jokes. Just, you're going to have to do it again anyway. So let's just get some information. He said, no. He said, you think there's only 2 of you here or 3 of you here? And it's not worthy of my time? He says, I don't see 3 of you. I see each of you and all of your children and all of your grandchildren and all of your great-grandchildren. Because if I teach you correctly and you have those children, right, you will put them on the right path. They'll follow the right path. If I don't teach you correctly, then they won't go on the right path. So I'm not teaching 3 of you. I'm teaching 3,000 of you. I'm teaching you and your children and your grandchildren forever. That was his important point. That our actions have ramifications. The actions of Lavan, by switching the sisters, had ramifications that were so large that the Jewish people went down to Egypt because Yosef, who should have been the firstborn, was not the firstborn. He ended up being sold by his brothers because they were upset with him. And going down to Egypt. So therefore we see a very important lesson that we might do something that seems to be very insignificant, and on the one hand it can be very significant in a very positive way or in a negative way. Excuse me. That really is an important message to learn. How anything we do, like we think, you have a baby and you spend all your time changing diapers and putting kids to sleep and throwing up, and you say, like, I went to graduate school for this. Like, this is what I went my whole life. My parents had me educated to go to university, graduate school, so I should change diapers. Excuse me. And I talk to all my friends. All we talk about is diapers. Excuse me. But I'll just finish with this. And he says that the answer is that you're looking at it too small. That child whose diaper you change in one day can change the world. Because you did this. The ramifications of your actions are not insignificant. A mother is not an insignificant person. She does acts that appear to be insignificant, but they're not insignificant. That child will become great because of what his mother did. So you shouldn't worry. I have been on this medication for a week. I'm not catching it. My doctor told me.
I hope you feel better.
Me too. But it is getting better. It was a lot worse the last couple of days. So that takes us through the Parsha.